Picture a machine built to leave the pavement behind, not with dirt on its face, but ambition in its bones. Something born from a place where asphalt ends and expectations usually die. Imagine the shock of seeing a name long tied to tradition suddenly chase horizons across deserts, tundra, and high mountain passes. Riders who once swore by low seats and long chrome started eyeing gear that looked more at home next to tents and trail maps. There was disbelief at first, then curiosity, then debate over whether the change was brilliance or betrayal. This wasn't just a new direction, it was a gamble played in full view of skeptics who had written the rules decades earlier. Its arrival forced a question no one thought would be asked by the company behind it. Can legacy adapt without losing its soul? That tension between past identity and future survival lit a fire under dealers, engineers, and riders who suddenly had to rethink what counted as authentic. Like and subscribe if you're into deep dives, and drop a comment on which story should come next. The Harley-Davidson Pan America 1250 launched in 2021 as a statement piece rather than a side project. And to understand how it happened, you have to look at the forces squeezing the company long before the bike hit the showroom floor. For decades, the brand built its image around heavyweight cruisers and touring models that appealed to riders chasing a specific sound, stance, and culture, but numbers were signaling trouble years before the Pan America 1250 arrived. Younger buyers weren't lining up for chrome-laden nostalgia, licensing rates were slipping, and the average owner's age kept climbing, while international brands found success in segments once ignored in Milwaukee. Internally, leaders knew that relying on loyalists who already owned 3 bikes wouldn't cut it forever, and every attempt to modernize was met with skepticism from both riders and dealers. That tension created a climate where a radical move needed more than ambition. It needed a reason investors, executives, and engineers could all stand behind. The rise of adventure touring gave that opening, and the Pan America 1250 became the pivot point no one outside the boardroom saw coming. What makes that move so significant is how calculated the risk actually was beneath the shock value. Behind the scenes, research teams dissected why riders were flocking to tall, versatile machines that could handle gravel roads and interstate miles with equal confidence. They studied the aftermarket habits of adventure riders, the accessories they spent on, and the way owners planned multi-day routes that mixed off-road stretches with long highway runs. The internal pitch wasn't built on abandoning identity, but expanding it. The promise was that Harley-Davidson could build an adventure bike without pretending to be something else. That argument carried weight because it offered a path to new markets without scrapping the cruiser business that still paid the bills. Engineers were pushed to keep elements of character without dragging legacy constraints into a segment dominated by weight savings, balance, and technical control. The Pan America 1250's design brief required a power plant that could breathe at high revs while staying compact enough for off-road geometry. And that meant walking away from air-cooling traditions to develop the Revolution Max engine. The decision to go liquid-cooled wasn't just about performance, it was about meeting emissions rules and temperature demands in markets where altitude, trail conditions, and variable fuel quality couldn't be ignored. Designers were told not to chase the aesthetics of established rivals, but also not to fall back on the familiar cruiser profile, which forced them to create something that stood apart from both Harley history and the usual adventure bike templates. They leaned into sharp edges, functional panels, and a stance that could telegraph purpose to riders who didn't care about chrome polish or low-end rumble. Internally, there were heated debates over seat height, suspension travel, and how much electronics would be necessary to be taken seriously in a segment where rider aids were no longer optional. Marketing teams faced their own dilemmas, especially when it came to educating dealers who had never sold bikes covered in skid plates and equipped for dirt. Many showroom staff didn't ride off-road, didn't own adventure gear, and had no experience discussing things like pannier racks, bash guards, or adjustable ride modes. Training became essential, and some dealerships resisted early, unsure that buyers would walk in asking for a Harley-Davidson with knobby tires. The company anticipated that hesitation and developed accessory packages, travel-oriented apparel, and promotional material designed to reframe the conversation without sounding defensive. The Pan America 1250's weight distribution, seat materials, windscreen shape, and instrument layout were all engineered to speak directly to riders who cared about function before history. At the same time, ergonomics had to support long-distance comfort without alienating taller or shorter riders, so adjustable components were prioritized in a way legacy models rarely allowed. Even exhaust routing was scrutinized to avoid compromising ground clearance or heat balance during off-road climbing and slow technical segments. Owners of traditional cruisers might never use those features, but the Pan America 1250 wasn't built for them alone. It was built to pull in riders who had never considered the brand before. That ambition extended to accessory partnerships, modular luggage solutions, and optional upgrades that mirrored the way adventure riders customized their machines for cross-state expeditions. With all of that planning, the biggest unknown was whether buyers would take a chance on a first attempt from a manufacturer with no adventure pedigree. Consumers in the segment tend to be demanding, and reputations are built over rugged miles, not marketing promises. If the Pan America 1250 stumbled in reliability, ergonomics, or capability, the fallout could have reinforced stereotypes about the brand being trapped in its past. On the flip side, success could reframe the company's relevance to new generations and international territories, where adventure bikes dominate rentals, tours, and training courses. The internal calculus wasn't simply about entering a new category, it was about proving that reinvention didn't have to erase legacy. That tension shaped every decision from suspension geometry to dashboard software, blending pragmatism with brand survival strategy. This foundation leads directly to how the Pan America 1250 was received once rubber finally met dirt, and critics lined up to test whether it deserved a place in a space it didn't invent. The Harley-Davidson Pan America 1250 faced an audience ready to scrutinize every bolt and feature, and its reception revealed as much about rider expectations as it did about engineering capability. When early reviewers lined up demo rides, many arrived assuming they would confirm long-held doubts that this was a cruiser company dabbling in terrain it didn't understand. Instead, the performance numbers forced immediate recalibration. Power output stacked up against well-established adventure machines, and the Revolution Max's responsiveness surprised riders used to associating the brand with low-end torque and slow-revving character. Suspension travel and handling balance earned respect on dirt and gravel tests, and electronic aids like adjustable ride modes, traction control, and cornering ABS showed that this wasn't a half-hearted entry. Tall, rally-style ergonomics and a customizable cockpit gave riders confidence rather than novelty, and those who had spent years on bikes from other manufacturers admitted the Pan America 1250 felt more refined than expected. Publications that once ignored anything from the brand, unless it had chrome, now ran full-length comparisons. And head-to-head tests put the Pan America 1250 within striking distance of category leaders. Its adaptive ride height system became a standout feature, solving a common barrier for riders put off by tall adventure bikes, and the technology instantly became a talking point across the industry. Some skeptics still dismissed it as a gamble that would fade after initial curiosity, but initial sales data and waiting lists signaled that the market was open to newcomers as long as the machines delivered. The aftermarket responded quickly with crash bars, soft luggage options, skid plates, tires tailored for mixed terrain, and tuning accessories designed to push the platform's limits. Riders who had always chosen another manufacturer's adventure bike began posting long trip reports across deserts, mountain passes, and muddy forest routes, using the Pan America 1250 in ways that showed confidence in its durability. Motorcycle rental companies in tourism-heavy regions added it to fleets alongside long-standing staples, signaling practical trust rather than brand loyalty. At the dealership level, training paid off. Staff who had never sold a bike with chain drive and tall stance learned how to guide buyers through technical questions and adventure-specific accessories. Some long-term customers remained unmoved, seeing the Pan America 1250 as a departure rather than an expansion. But many more appreciated that the company wasn't content to fade quietly while waiting for cruiser interest to rebound. International reception was equally telling. In Europe and South America, where adventure travel has a strong foothold, the bike gained traction among riders who wanted something distinctive without sacrificing capability. Fleet buyers for guided tours began experimenting with the platform, and feedback highlighted impressive comfort over long journeys paired with reliability under duress. Reviews acknowledged minor shortcomings, windscreen turbulence for some heights, quibbles over seat firmness, questions about long-term parts availability, but few could point to fundamental design flaws. The bigger issue became perception. Could a company associated with lifestyle culture convince hardcore adventure riders that it belonged on rugged trails and remote routes? Time and mileage began answering that question as owners posted footage of the Pan America 1250 climbing rocky inclines, fording streams, and navigating sand without complaint. In the US, the bike arrived during a moment when outdoor travel and dual sport interest surged. putting it in direct competition with long-standing adventure models. Riders choosing between the Pan America 1250 and its established rivals often cited power delivery, seat adjustability, and the adaptive ride height technology as deciding factors. Its price point landed in a competitive zone, not undercutting major players but justifying cost with innovation and performance. The dealership network, long criticized for focusing almost entirely on cruisers, adapted more quickly than expected thanks to accessory bundles and adventure-focused events. Test ride tours allowed potential buyers to experience the bike off pavement, and many dealers partnered with off-road instructors to offer training sessions. That outreach mattered in a segment where credibility is earned through capability rather than branding. At rallies and off-road gatherings, the Pan America 1250 stood out not as a novelty, but as a contender. And over time, it became less about proving doubters wrong and more about keeping pace with evolving expectations. The move into the adventure segment also forced the company to think about parts logistics, service training, and rider education in new ways. Technicians needed to understand the complexities of water cooling, high compression internals, and advanced software that rival brands had refined over years. The investment in service readiness paid off, preventing early adopters from feeling abandoned after purchase. The attention to long-distance reliability meant that tour operators and solo travelers could count on the platform without fearing breakdowns in remote areas. Owners who documented cross-country rides noted fuel efficiency, competitive with rivals, and praised the balance between highway stability and off-road composure. The evolution of perception was gradual but visible. Forums that once mocked the idea of a Harley-labeled adventure bike began sharing maintenance tips, gear recommendations, and trail reports. The Pan America 1250 became a topic of discussion not because it was an oddity, but because it held its own in situations where heritage brands had long dominated. That acceptance, however, didn't come without skepticism from traditionalists who saw resources diverted away from the cruiser lineup. Those concerns set the stage for understanding the long-term consequences and the impact the bike would have on the brand's identity and future strategy. The Harley-Davidson Pan America 1250 entered the market as a calculated risk, and its long-term impact reaches beyond sales numbers or industry awards. What made the move consequential was how it forced the company to wrestle with its own identity while proving it could compete on performance rather than nostalgia. The Pan America 1250 showed that engineering talent inside the organization could meet modern demands without leaning on legacy cues to sell the result. That mattered internally as much as it did to riders, because it validated investment in innovation at a time when growth depended on reaching new customers. Dealers who once hesitated to stock tall, off-road capable machines now had proof that the right product could draw in buyers who would never have considered a heavyweight cruiser. The Pan America 1250's success also signaled that the future of the company might rely on creating new lanes instead of defending old ones. Manufacturers watching the experiment unfold took note of how quickly perception can shift when capability aligns with opportunity. As the initial launch gave way to updated trims and expanded accessory catalogs, the platform began evolving rather than fading. The bike's presence in adventure travel groups, rental fleets, and training courses helped standardize it as more than a novelty. Riders who put thousands of miles on mixed terrain reported maintenance intervals and durability on par with established adventure machines. That real-world evidence built momentum among buyers who wanted to see the platform proven before committing. For a company once defined by air-cooled engines and low-slung silhouettes, the Pan America 1250 created a blueprint for blending tradition with practicality. It showed that technology like adaptive ride height could redefine expectations in segments where ergonomics often limit accessibility. It also proved that styling could be functional without mimicking rivals, and that engine design could evolve without abandoning character. The conversation among longtime owners gradually shifted from disbelief to curiosity, with some adding the Pan America 1250 alongside their cruisers rather than replacing them. Its presence in garages across the country challenged stereotypes about what the brand could deliver. The legacy of the Pan America 1250 will hinge on how the company leverages its momentum. If follow-up models continue refining performance and broadening the platform's capabilities, the bike may be remembered as the turning point that preserved relevance in a changing industry. If the effort stalls, it will still be remembered as the moment the brand proved it could innovate under pressure. Either way, its influence on design meetings, marketing strategies, and dealership culture is undeniable. The Pan America 1250 did more than enter a category. It expanded the horizon of what was possible for a name long tied to a different world. That evolution sets up the conversation about what buyers and enthusiasts should expect next, especially as the adventure segment continues to grow and competitors respond to a new benchmark. The Harley-Davidson Pan America 1250 rewrote expectations in ways that matter directly to U.S. riders weighing practicality, ownership cost, and long-term support. For anyone considering it today, availability remains strong across the country thanks to dealership adoption that accelerated after early sales exceeded projections. Pre-owned examples are entering the market with mileage histories that help buyers judge reliability, and service training has become standard at most authorized locations. Pricing depends heavily on trim and accessories, but the Pan America 1250 generally sits in the middle of the premium adventure segment, above entry-level options yet justified by features like adaptive ride height, advanced ride modes, and versatile ergonomics. Riders looking for financing or trade-in paths often find more flexibility than with imported rivals because the dealership network treats the model as a core product rather than an experiment. Ownership costs reflect modern engineering demands rather than legacy cruiser standards. Oil changes, software updates, and cooling system maintenance are part of the reality, but intervals and parts pricing are competitive for the segment. Reliability reports from long-distance riders suggest the Revolution Max platform holds up under both highway stress and off-road strain, with early worries about electronics and heat management largely subsiding after updates and rider experience accumulated. Some parts and accessories can carry higher pricing than aftermarket solutions for rivals, but the expanding third-party support has softened that gap. In terms of import or availability concerns, buyers in states with rugged terrain or strong adventure touring communities have seen inventory cycles stabilize, meaning less wait time and more model variety. The legacy question looms large for potential owners who wonder if the Pan America 1250 will endure as more than a bold detour. Its market presence, growing community, and continued investment from the manufacturer indicate that it isn't fading into obscurity. Instead, it has carved out a place among serious adventure machines while reshaping dealership culture and brand identity. For U.S. riders watching the used market, early models equipped with factory luggage or upgraded suspension packages tend to hold value better, and those planning extended rides can count on growing support networks. The bigger takeaway is how the Pan America 1250 changed perception without demanding riders abandon practicality or performance expectations. It removed excuses from both skeptics and diehards by proving that evolution is not betrayal when executed with purpose. The bike's relevance now sits at the intersection of usability, legacy, and ambition. Final line. A brand that once refused to leave the pavement now builds machines ready to chase the horizon on its own terms.